Mr. Speaker, it is a privilege to once again address Parliament, and it continues to be an honour to serve this community as a member of Her Majesty's Government of Gibraltar, now in my 11th year. On this occasion, I set out my budget address in my capacity as Minister with responsibility for justice, equality, and public standards and regulation. Before I speak about those responsibilities, Mr. Speaker, I would like to begin by making reference to the pandemic that we have just emerged from, and which clearly is still not over, and has even played some mischief at our budget session, and has denied us from enjoying the opportunity of listening to the Father of the House deliver his speech. I am sure that we can all agree, Mr. Speaker, that when it comes to Sir Joe and the budget, reading his speech is not the same as being in his presence when he delivers it. Mr. Speaker, I have been in touch with him this morning, and I wish my friend a very speedy recovery from COVID. Now, Mr. Speaker, this is a stark reminder that COVID is not yet over, and neither is the economic effect that COVID has had, not just on us, but globally. And for this reason, Mr. Speaker, I just don't understand a lot of what has been said by the members opposite so far. They speak as if without any realization or acknowledgement of the global economic situation. Where have they been for the last 2 years, Mr. Speaker? The bottom line is that we have to tighten our belts for just a little bit, just 2 years, to be able to get us out of this. But of course, pensioners and those on lower wages will be insulated, as they rightly ought to be. Mr. Speaker, I must congratulate the Chief Minister for being brave in what he has done in the budget and his rationale for so doing. Let's hope, Mr. Speaker, that we can transition back to normality as soon as possible. Speaking about what we had to endure from the members opposite, Mr. Speaker, I must call out something that was said by the Honourable Mr. Clinton yesterday. I am sure, Mr. Speaker, that he did not mean to mislead Parliament in what he said, but he was clearly disingenuous in the way that he presented the matter, in that he did not provide the full picture. Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Mr. Clinton made a big fuss about our business class travel, Mr. Speaker. And this is because his Parliament question was quite one-sided and limited only to ask when we travel in business class. He never asked how many times we travel otherwise. Mr. Speaker, I travel economy as much as I travel business. And we all do, Mr. Speaker. The Chief Minister, the Deputy Chief Minister, the Minister for Tourism, who are the ones who travel the most. And I know, Mr. Speaker, that they also travel economy. But, Mr. Speaker, he did not mention that part, did he? Mr. Speaker, I only travel when it is absolutely necessary, as we all do. Personally, I don't like to travel. I hate packing, I hate flying, I hate airports, I get travel sick. But I do it because it's my job to do. And we all do it because it's our duty. Only last week, Mr. Speaker, I was in Berlin for only 48 hours, and I flew Ryanair, Mr. Speaker. Not even sure whether that classifies even as economy. Mr. Speaker, when I traveled to Iceland, I traveled economy to Iceland as well, and that trip was subsidized by the CPA, Mr. Speaker, because I was traveling in my capacity as the chair of the CWP. But, Mr. Speaker, while the Honourable Mr. Clinton pontificates about business class travel from his pedestal, I need to remind him that last year we both travelled together to Northern Ireland for a CPA conference. Mr. Speaker, it's my budget address. Perhaps the Honourable gentleman can wait for me to finish. My address. So, Mr. Speaker, we travelled to Northern Ireland, and I travelled direct on EasyJet. And get this, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman travelled BA business class and not direct, so he had 2 flights there and 2 flights back. So, Mr. Speaker, I make this point.
Do is force anybody to give way. It is in the honourable members. Please continue.
Mr. Speaker, what I have said in my intervention is fact, and what I have said is that the honourable member did not provide the full facts in his. I will continue, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in August 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, I was appointed Minister for Health, and I held this responsibility until a few months ago. It has been very difficult, all-consuming, and a very intense time. Mr. Speaker, the job of being Minister with responsibility for civil contingencies and also Minister for Health meant that the work was relentless, and I have been pretty much working on adrenaline for 2 years. Mr. Speaker, when I became Minister for Health, at the outset, the priority was to support an organisation that was at the coalface in the battle against COVID, particularly at ERS. Additionally, it became apparent to me that I had 2 major priorities as Minister for Health. The first was to make mental health a priority, not just for the GHA, but for the whole of Gibraltar. And using the Public Health England Situation Analysis Report 2019, which I immediately published when I became Minister for Health, using that as a benchmark, I launched the 5-year strategy in July 21, with the objective of improving the mental health and well-being of the population of Gibraltar by having a comprehensive, integrated mental health system that promotes self-care, recovery, and reduces stigma. The strategy was developed through comprehensive, multi-agency, stakeholder, patient and public engagement process, with listening and learning being at the cornerstone principle. The strategy has 4 overarching strategic priorities aligned with the World Health Organization Global Mental Health Action Plan 2013 to 2020. Importantly, the strategy has an inbuilt mechanism of accountability and includes timelines for the implementation of the key milestones. There were some very immediate improvements last year in the delivery of the GHA mental health services, including the introduction of a mental health crisis line at the 111. I wish to thank at this point, Mr. Speaker, the members of the statutory boards, the Mental Health Board and the Mental Health Tribunal. An enormous amount of time is dedicated by those who sit on these, and they do so on a voluntary basis. Immediately also, Mr. Speaker, I became acutely aware of the impact that the pandemic was having on our hospital services, and I feared the outcome of its aftermath. It was with the invaluable help and guidance from Professor Ian Cumming, OBE, who I initially engaged in January 21 to devise and lead on our COVID vaccination strategy, but who became invested in assisting Gibraltar, that we worked together on what were to become landmark reforms and the Reset, Restart, Recover programme later that year. On the 30th of November 2021, I announced these landmark reforms with the objective of improving the GHA services provided to patients and the accountability of the authority to the government and therefore the taxpayer. This represented radical reform, Mr. Speaker. A 7-point plan for Reset, Restart, Recover was announced, and also a reconfiguration of the GHA board to ensure its functions as the key strategic oversight body for the GHA, the removal of the Minister for Health as the chair of the board, and a new independent chair of the board appointed, and the introduction also of a new position of Director General to provide overall leadership in the organization. This restructure represented our serious and genuine desire to transform the GHA. Mr. Speaker, I could think of no one better to be the interim chair of the board at this time than Professor Cumming, and he was asked to take up this role on an interim basis. I wish him and the board all the best in ensuring that the GHA deliver for us all. Mr. Speaker, in my time as Minister for Health, I worked with some very dedicated professionals. I thank them for their guidance and support during this time. And the services, Mr. Speaker, of 3 nurses in the GHA have been recognised with honours. Of these, Mr. Speaker, I've worked very closely with the Head of Elderly Residential Services, Susan Vallejo, and the Director of Nursing, Sandy Gracia. And I can certainly recognise, Mr. Speaker, that their honour is very, very well deserved. Congratulations to them. So starting with my responsibilities as Minister for Civil Contingency. Mr. Speaker, as you will imagine, the centre of the government's ongoing response to the COVID-19 pandemic has been the Office of Civil Contingencies. 2021 and 2022 has continued to be largely dominated by the global pandemic, as well as planning for a possible no-negotiated Brexit outcome and dealing with the consequences of the ongoing war in Ukraine. When our vaccines arrived at the beginning of 2021, Mr. Speaker, and we have to thank the UK government for their generous and constant supply of these, our community saw a rapid decline in positive cases, deaths and hospitalizations. The hugely successful vaccination program executed by the GHA allowed us to start winning the battle against COVID, and as restrictions quickly started to be eased, Gibraltar became the centre of attention for a post-vaccination world. As the new Director of Public Health expressed her concerns over vaccine effectiveness waning, the booster program was launched in early October, with the aim of offering maximum protection to our people over the winter months. As cases in the boosted population started to improve again and hospitalization of positive cases were kept at a steady and manageable rate, we were once again reminded about the risks from new variants of concern. But Mr. Speaker, with the large uptake of boosters and with a better understanding of the Omicron variant, the first quarter of 2021 has allowed Gibraltar to continue with its exit strategy and easing the vast majority of restrictions. The last 2 years have been painfully difficult for everyone in our community. But it now seems that we are well on our road to recovery, noting, of course, that we must continue to remain cautious and continuously monitor the situation. Mr. Speaker, when Russia invaded Ukraine on the 24th of February 2022, Gibraltarians living in Ukraine with their young families reached out to us for support. The Office of Civil Contingencies assisted with the repatriation of the family by making the necessary travel arrangements and deploying one of its officers to Poland to meet the family to deliver the necessary emergency passports and other travel documentation. Mr. Speaker, the Office of Civil Contingencies has also coordinated much of the support given to other Ukrainian families who fled the war-torn country to safety in Gibraltar, where they have been provided with accommodation at the retreat centre and coordinated support from the Care Agency and the Department of Education, among others. Mr. Speaker, I could not have asked for a more dedicated or focused team to steer us through these extremely difficult times. My thanks to the Civil Contingencies Coordinator, Mr. Ivo Lopez, whose efforts were also recognised in his very well-deserved award, and Mr. Ernest Danino and Brian Brooks. The latter, who recently with others, also made a round trip to deliver medical supplies to Ukraine on behalf of the Red Cross. A selfless endeavour indeed, and they should be congratulated. Mr. Speaker, on my justice responsibilities, I will commence with the Gibraltar Financial Intelligence Unit. Mr. Speaker, GIFU plays a critical role in the fight against economic crime, but it also uses financial intelligence to gather other criminal conduct. The unit has over the last 2 years made an immense contribution to ensure that Gibraltar features well on the Financial Action Task Force post-observation period. In the process, it has built on the successes of 2020, driven decisively with new developments, and will create innovative approaches to tackling financial crime. In 2021, Mr. Speaker, the GIFU received almost 4,000 suspicious activity reports. This has placed a significant workload on the unit, but it has also taken advantage of its digital transformation with better analytical software that helps strengthen its capacity by creating a modern digital ecosystem that harnesses the many pieces of information received from a wide range of resources. Mr. Speaker, GIFU is not just providing training locally. And this is quite a remarkable recognition of the level of work that they deliver. In 2021, GIFU were invited by the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime to deliver training to Morocco's financial institutions, sharing Gibraltar's experience in improving engagement with the private sector to detect illicit financial activity and to end human trafficking. It is also delivering training to Interpol's project manager, an initiative designed to enhance capacity in Latin America and the Caribbean countries to target the proceeds of smuggling persons or trafficking in human beings. Mr. Speaker, another significant development has been the establishment of a public-private partnership called the Financial Liaison and Intelligence Network. This partnership is led by GIFU and is comprised of Gibraltar's banks, the Royal Gibraltar Police, HM Customs, and the Gibraltar Financial Services Commission, and is expected to greatly enhance information sharing. As the lead agency for counter-proliferation financing, the GFIU established the Joint Coordinating Intelligence Group to counter proliferation financing, a pioneering working group that ensures that Gibraltar mitigates the threat to global security by those intent on facilitating the illicit development of weapons of mass destruction. Mr. Speaker, turning now to the Royal Gibraltar Police. The last year has seen the RGP work to achieve recommendations and areas for improvement set out in the 2020 report by Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabularies and Fire and Rescue Services. This has meant the RGP undertaking some significant reform to achieve this. Crime recording is now more in line with Home Office counting rules, and the RGP has established the criteria which has been followed by UK police forces. Further to this, the Code of Ethics has been embedded in all operational activity, determining standards of behaviour and principles of policing. This activity is now coordinated by the Ethics Champion Lead with an independent committee of ethics overseeing ethical dilemmas in the RGP. To achieve this, the RGP has introduced policies and procedures determining standards of behaviour, mechanisms for officers and staff to report on poor behavioural standards, and control measures to protect the reputation of the organisation. The entire workforce and any external partners working with the RGP will require to be vetted, as is the practice in UK police forces, and a vetting unit has been established with an emphasis on a new internal counter-corruption unit. Mr. Speaker, the recently created Victims of Crime Support Team has trained officers in every line with the Victims in Criminal Proceedings regulations. Every victim of crime is now contacted and provided with support through the entire investigation process. Mr. Speaker, combating domestic abuse also features highly on the RGP's agenda, with the creation of a domestic abuse unit implementing better protective measures for victims of crime. Mr. Speaker, the government is of course committed to supporting the Royal Gibraltar Police. Last week, I had the pleasure to speak at the passing out parade for 17 new recruits. I wish them all the best in their careers in the policing family, and recruitment for a new intake of officers has already commenced. Mr. Speaker, turning to the Gibraltar Court Service, during the last year, the law courts have continued to work extraordinarily hard to deal effectively with the current substantial workload brought about as a result of the scaling down of operations during both COVID-19 lockdown periods. The current full complement of judges, coupled with the fact that when hit with a pandemic there was no backlog at either the Magistrates' Court or the Supreme Court, allows the law courts to continue to be in a strong position. Mr. Speaker, the Right Honourable Sir Martin Moore-Bick retired this year in March as a Justice of Appeal. bringing the current number of appointed justices down to 4. In order to maintain the complement of the Court of Appeal judges at 6, it is envisaged that recruitment will proceed for 2 more justices. As a result of a number of retirements and in order to maintain the complement of existing justices of the peace, on the advice from the Judicial Services Commission, it is anticipated that the recruitment process will shortly be advertised for appointment. And finally, acting on the advice from the Judicial Service Commission, the government has agreed to continue to provide funding for the 4th judge of the Supreme Court. Mr. Speaker, and now the government law officers, the government lawyers, Mr. Speaker. And since the last budget speech, Mr. Speaker, our team of lawyers have continued to play a crucial part in delivering legal advice to the government, shaping legislation, and providing legal representation to our law enforcement agencies. On legislation, during the last year, the government law officers published the following legislation: 18 government bills, 16 acts, 344 legal notices, and, Mr. Speaker, a staggering 423 COVID regulations. And at this point, Mr. Speaker, I really would like to thank the small team who were working on the COVID regulations so intensely during the last 2 years, because sometimes, Mr. Speaker, we literally had to work day and night to get these regulations right. Mr. Speaker, related to Brexit, the GLO has continued with the publication of measures to revoke or amend retained directly applicable EU legislation under the European Union Withdrawal Act. Mr. Speaker, the following legislative projects have also come to fruition during this period, with the commencement of the Freedom of Information legislation. The Register of Property of Occupation Act 2021 was also commenced, and associated subsidiary legislation published in the Medical Gibraltar Health Authority Act regulations, which reconfigured the GHA board and separated the functions of the GHA and the Ministry of Health and Care. Mr. Speaker, following the recent ruling by the Court of Appeal in February this year, the government published the Employment Bullying at Work Amendment Act, which seeks to address the issues raised. The government has also passed the British Sign Language Act. And, Mr. Speaker, all this work has been done thanks to the lawyers at the GLO. Now, Mr. Speaker, the law drafters are currently working on a number of other legislative projects that I have commissioned in my capacity as Minister for Justice, including in relation to a bill to prohibit vaping for under 18-year-olds, online safety legislation, the domestic abuse bill having been previously published as a command paper, a project on gender neutrality in legislation, and conversion therapy ban. I also wish to announce that I will be commencing 2 important and significant reviews of existing legislation: a review of family law and a review of crimes legislation. The team at the GLO are preparing the groundwork for me so that I can formally proceed with the consultation process. I'm also involved in their ongoing work regarding the extension of a number of Council of Europe and United Nations conventions to Gibraltar, and these include the United Nations Convention on Corruption, Disabilities, the Rights of the Child, and the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. I thank the team, Mr. Speaker, for all their hard work and advice. Mr. Speaker, turning to my responsibilities on safeguarding. As the Minister with responsibility for children and adult safeguarding and regulation, I believe that no child or vulnerable adult should be exposed to harm or left behind. Everyone has the right to feel safe and live at peace. To do so, we need to tackle the social issues that have arisen or have been exacerbated by the pandemic and lead the way for continued changes and improvements to our safeguarding system. Effective safeguarding requires partnership, collaborating with individuals, professionals, and other agencies, working together to recognize the potential of preventing harm. Prevention is therefore the responsibility of a wide range of agencies, as well as other organizations, charities, and groups. It is for this reason that I reconstituted the function of the Child Protection Committee and also established a Safeguarding Adult Board and a Youth Offending Committee, the latter two being the first of their kind in Gibraltar. I must highlight that the purpose of the Child Protection Committee and the Safeguarding Adults Board is to provide a joint forum to allow for a close working relationship between the Care Agency, the Royal Gibraltar Police, the GHA and the Education Department and other key organisations who share the common aim of protecting children and vulnerable adults at risk and for developing, monitoring and reviewing safeguarding policies. The chairperson of both committees is currently the Chief Executive of the Care Agency, who reports and provides advice to me on safeguarding with respect to Child Protection Committee and Safeguarding Adults Board, and I am very grateful for these additional responsibilities that he discharges. Social care and safeguarding services all around the world have experienced great challenges in providing optimal care and protection for the most vulnerable members of their communities during the COVID-19 pandemic. The Care Agency and all other bodies with safeguarding functions have spent the last 2 years dealing with the challenges of the pandemic by building on innovative ways to manage risk. This must continue as we move to recover from the consequences of the pandemic, especially since the full impact of COVID is not yet known. Mr. Speaker, in this regard, the Youth Offending Committee has been working towards preparing recommendations which include analysis and conclusions of the main issues that have arisen throughout their meetings. All the services involved are united to ensure that children are supported and empowered to make the most of their lives, enjoy and achieve and make a positive contribution to the community within Gibraltar, and agree that this requires all involved with the child to tailor the services to the individual child's needs. This committee has identified ways which progress can be made to ensure the reduction in the first-time offenders, a reduction in reoffending, and a reduction in the use of custody, especially for first-time offending. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to the management of sex offenders in the community, and this comes under the Multi-Agency Public Protection Arrangements, MAPA. There are currently 9 trained designated risk managers across the different MAPA organisations who undergo yearly specialist training in the assessment and management of risk posed by sex offenders. From the DRMs and representatives of key partner agencies, a core team has been formed, and the core team receives further specialist skills in assessment and interventions with MAPA cases to ensure effective risk management. A very difficult job to undertake indeed, Mr. Speaker. The Public Protection Panel comprises of members from the MAPA organisations and is responsible for the identification and implementation of risk management plans for each offender. Mr. Speaker, turning now my attention to Her Majesty's Prison Service. From a prisoner management perspective, 2021 saw the highest daily average of prisoners since 2015, and there were 54. A figure which was adversely affected by the influx of detainees which were unable to be deported for a period because of COVID restrictions. This impact factor is no longer the case, and at present the daily average population stands at 38 for the first quarter. Prison facilities continue to be well used by those in custody as the year has progressed, with all these seeing a high percentage of users. Of these, 32% of the prison population attended educational classes. This is up from 29%. 91% made use of the gymnasium, and 49% attended vocational classes, and this is up from 22.4%. Counselling is essential in providing support, and the system must maximise its efforts and pick up from the excellent work coming out from the prison's voluntary drug testing scheme, and this currently boasts participation of 67%. The programme will better place offenders on the road to rehabilitation and successful reintegration into society, and therefore reduce the rate of reoffending. Mr. Speaker, turning now my attention to probation services. The probation service continues to provide services to the courts in terms of pre-sentence reports and the parole board for the consideration of parole. Probation officers continue to supervise and manage those offenders subject to licence conditions and community rehabilitation orders, and carry out intervention plans based on the needs of the offender. One of the probation officers also forms part of the prison board and undertakes prison inspections. Last year, probation officers underwent training on the Freedom Programme as part of the government's domestic abuse strategy, and this programme is now being delivered with perpetrators of domestic abuse as part of their licence conditions or the community rehabilitation orders. The probation service continues to explore further training on domestic abuse interventions. Mr. Speaker, I turn now to the final of the uniform bodies that I am responsible for, the fire services. Starting with the Airport Fire and Rescue Services, they have maintained a very busy period of activity. The primary focus throughout the last year has been to consolidate practical training and essential development courses. It has also undergone external reviews to ensure that its personnel, manning and resources are adequate to fulfill its operational response tasks, and that these are delivered in accordance with mandated international standards. At the same time, it has reviewed all its processes and operational procedures to ensure that these remain current in the lead up to the 15-month full audit by the UK Civil Aviation Inspectors. As integral components of their ongoing competence-based training, AFRS personnel undertook a variety of training and instruction courses which are fundamental elements of the continued professional training. In addition, senior officers also attended an airport fire officers course in the UK, which was an excellent opportunity for them to work alongside senior officers from across UK airports. The AFRS, Mr. Speaker, is an acknowledged and well-respected organisation among UK airport fire services in different aviation fire and rescue forums. So staying in continual touch with these allows it to keep abreast of industry developments and thereby remain relevant. Mr. Speaker, last year, the AFRS underwent an overview audit, inspection, and a series of task resource analysis sessions under the auspices of the Defence Fire Safety Regulator. This entailed both theoretical and practical sessions to formally confirm and document that the AFRS is meeting its mandated incident response requirements with sufficient personnel and firefighting resources. In this respect, Mr. Speaker, the AFRS was given a clean bill of health for its operational effectiveness. Mr. Speaker, the AFRS continues to work closely with the Gibraltar Fire and Rescue Service, having a great professional working relationship and collaborating on training and other projects of common benefit to both. The AFRS strives for organizational and individual self-improvement, ensuring that its firefighters maintain the necessary skills and competences which are critical for mitigating risk, enabling safety, and allowing them to effectively fulfill their roles. This underpins its strategic operating principles with its team, always moving forward in a dynamic cycle of improvement while positively responding to the evolving challenges facing fire service. So, Mr. Speaker, from the AFRS, I turn to the GFRS. And, Mr. Speaker, for them, it's been a year of continued progress and adaptation to new challenges, no different to the rest of the public service and Gibraltar in general, as we all move out of the pandemic restrictions. With a growing number of developments and amendments to fire safety standards and innovative fire engineering solutions, the Gibraltar Fire and Rescue Fire Safety Team is constantly challenged and does a magnificent job in the anticipation of risks, subsequently impacting their frontline operation preparedness. The GFRS continues with their primary objective, implementing and adopting measures or procedures necessary to ensure that they maintain the competence and provide the best possible emergency response to safeguard Gibraltar and its citizens. Mr. Speaker, the GFRS are also very much part, as first responders, of the Gibraltar National Domestic Abuse Strategy, and they too are receiving training. Mr. Speaker, I'm finally turning to firefighter recruitment selection process. GFRS officers have been working for months to come up with the right formula for the revised firefighter recruit selection process. This new system mirrors the selection process applied by their counterparts in the UK, with a single standard for all applicants, and was put to the test last month, leading to the appointment of their newest firefighter recruit. In efforts to adopt full transparency and equal opportunities, the video footage capturing all activities is provided through the GFRS website and demonstrates the process and level of fitness required from all candidates. Mr. Speaker, it goes without saying that I have been working very closely with the Chief Fire Officer in the same way that I have been working with the Commissioner of Police to try and increase diversity in the number of people who join the force. The number of women who join the force, Mr. Speaker, and the Ministry of Equality are working with both departments in this regard. But, Mr. Speaker, during the past 2 years, most of GFRS's efforts have been focused around the pandemic and implementing rigorous measures to protect minimum levels of response if faced with virus spread within the department. Mr. Speaker, very testing and scary times indeed, no doubt, for staff who went the extra mile to ensure Gibraltar could still count on an efficient emergency response. I must thank all in the essential services and uniform bodies that I am responsible for, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as they are the ones who run towards danger in order to keep the rest of us safe. Mr. Speaker, in the recent reshuffle, I was given the additional responsibilities of public regulation, regulations generally, and town planning. So I now turn my attention to my responsibilities for town planning and building control. I wish to start by reminding this House of the government's commitment to the development plan. The government recognises the importance of having an up-to-date development plan in place, and this is important for a strategic approach to our developments. I hope to make further announcements on this once the tender process has been completed. On the day-to-day, the volume of applications dealt by the department continues at the high levels of past years, with a total of 961 applications across all application types between the 1st of January and the 31st of May 2022. Probably one of the largest and most complex applications that the department has dealt with has been the recent application in respect of the East Side. Mr. Speaker, in 2021, the Development and Planning Commission held a total of 11 meetings, and while so far this year there have been 6 meetings. Additionally, the DPC's subcommittee meets regularly to determine minor applications, which greatly help to speed up the decision-making process for more minor applications. There were 27 meetings of the subcommittee, and 12 last year and 12 so far this year. Mr. Speaker, DPC meetings have continued to be held remotely via video conferencing. The meetings have also continued to be live streamed on the government's YouTube channel. Mr. Speaker, I will ensure that public access to planning applications and the decision-making process continues with the transparency that we have been enjoying in the last over 10 years, and I shall strive to improve on this accessibility and transparency if at all necessary and possible. Mr. Speaker, the department continues their work to develop and improve the e-planning service that allows for easy access for applications and details to the public and provides a platform through which applicants can submit their applications. I am pleased to say, Mr. Speaker, how successful this function of e-government is, and almost 98% of planning and building control applications submitted in this period, 1st of January to 31st of May, were submitted via this portal. Mr. Speaker, my department is also undertaking an exercise to review the current building regulations and various building codes with a view to bringing them in line with the latest standards. Finally, Mr. Speaker, we will be having a new work stream that will be a collaboration between town planning and building control and the Ministry for Equality, with a view to taking a more holistic view and making Gibraltar more accessible to people with disabilities. On regulation, Mr. Speaker, the Gibraltar Regulatory Authority has again managed to remain fully operational during another challenging year, efficiently continuing to respond to public concerns and to enhance its awareness-raising initiatives. Mr. Speaker, testament to the GRA's ability to remain flexible was its successful hosting of a virtual European case handling workshop in 2021, an annual feature in the calendar of European data protection authorities, and typically an in-person event. This workshop provides a platform for international cooperation and focuses on the practical implementation of data protection on a day-to-day basis. Mr. Speaker, this year has also seen the GRA win an International Global Privacy Assembly Award for its awareness-raising initiatives undertaken regarding its education and public awareness work. Congratulations to them, Mr. Speaker. Furthermore, the GRA continues to proactively publish guidance notes and organize data protection workshops intended to promote collaboration and debate and to provide an open forum whereby organizations can discuss data protection law and best practice. A very difficult field to navigate, Mr. Speaker, no doubt. Turning to the Office of Fair Trading. Mr. Speaker, my predecessor in this respect spoke yesterday about the work of the OFT. I thank my good friend, Minister Darianani, for his dynamic work and progress in this respect. I know, Mr. Speaker, that it was his intention to drive further progress on the work and build on the work that we had already done. So in addition to the department's responsibilities that he outlined, Mr. Speaker, I will mention the Office of Fair Trading's anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing and regulatory role for the real estate, agent and high-value goods sectors, as this continues to mature and the implementation of new procedures and ongoing supervisory programs. The team is currently conducting a round of on-site visits to businesses in these sectors on a risk-based approach. Of the 13 visits carried out since November 2021, the OFT has issued 5 fines to local businesses. In the past year, Mr. Speaker, the team has also carried out significant outreach to these sectors to support businesses and achieve compliance. This has included hosting virtual training opportunities with the assistance of the Gibraltar Financial Intelligence Unit. And on the Fair Trading Bill, Mr. Speaker, I can confirm that the government continues to work with the OFT on the Fair Trading Bill, with the aim to produce a more appropriate and mature framework within which the OFT can operate, and again, building on the work that was previously done. This bill will make the establishment of new businesses easier and quicker by simplifying the business licensing process. This will therefore drastically improve further the manner in which the OFT can provide its services to the public, and at the same time, the new bill will protect consumers in Gibraltar and allow the OFC to set trading standards. Mr. Speaker, having recently taken on this role, I am already working on this aspect. Given that this is such a big and important piece of work, consultation is key. And I am committed to continue to engage with the Gibraltar Federation of Small Businesses and the Chamber of Commerce to ensure that we will support the business community in Gibraltar in the same way as my friend Minister Darianani did. Finally, on regulation, there are 2 major innovations in the pipeline. The first, of course, as we heard from the Chief Minister, is the introduction of the Anti-Corruption Authority. Mr. Speaker, I have given this work priority as soon as the COVID pressures permitted. There is a draft bill in final form, and it is going through the final stages of the internal approval. It is my hope to be able to publish it as soon as possible in the coming weeks. And Mr. Speaker, a very interesting new piece of work that I have now embarked upon is the regulation of quality of care. I have already met with the chair of the Medical Registration Board and the chair of the Nurses Midwives Registration Board to consult on their views on the most appropriate way forward. The new structure will also make provision, importantly, Mr. Speaker, for quality of care inspections of providers. I am very excited about this innovative piece of work, and I shall make more detailed announcements after the summer. And now, finally, Mr. Speaker, turning to my portfolio as Minister for Equality. During this administration's 3 terms of office, it has been my privilege to have held various portfolios. Of all those portfolios, the Equality portfolio has been the one that I have held from the very first day. It was a great honour to be chosen as Gibraltar's first Minister for Equality in 2011, and it is a responsibility that I have always been and continue to be very proud of. Mr. Speaker, as Minister for Equality, I lead the Ministry for Equality, a department which has which our administration has created and which is dedicated on upholding equality principles and to eliminating all forms of discrimination. While it is a sad reflection that equality matters were given little, if any, political or parliamentary consideration until 2011, I have to say, Mr. Speaker, that it has been incredibly rewarding to have been at the helm of a department which has been innovative in its philosophy, visions, policies, and of course, most importantly, legislation. On LGBTQ+, Mr. Speaker, as the month of June draws to an end today, this being Pride Month, I think it fitting to begin with LGBTQ+ rights. Mr. Speaker, no less because in the 11 years since the inception of the Department of Equality, we have made such huge strides to ensure that gay rights are properly protected by legislation, and that through our awareness campaigns and community engagement, these are understood and embraced. The development of LGBTQ+ rights since we have been in office has been nothing short of remarkable. And I feel that this was symbolized most recently with a very successful Pride celebration event last Saturday. Although this was not the first Pride celebration in Gibraltar, and incidentally I also attended the one that was organized in 2014, and that one was also successful, Mr. Speaker, for its time. And this year's was different, as it reflected that we have progressed even further in the 8 years since the first one. I must congratulate, Mr. Speaker, the LGBTQ+ organizing committee who organized this year's event so marvelously. Looking back now, Mr. Speaker, it's hard to believe that the first time that the word gay was mentioned in Parliament was in my very first budget speech in 2012, and that the first time, regrettably, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the first time that gay rights were first properly achieved in this Parliament was in 2014. The Civil Partnership Bill, which was the first bill I ever moved in this Parliament, was a landmark piece of legislation. For the first time in Gibraltar's history, this bill enabled the formal recognition of relationships between couples of the same sex. 2 years later, in 2016, I brought the Civil Marriage Amendment Act to this House to allow for civil marriage of gay couples as well. Further to this, we have legislated to outlaw homophobic hate crime and hate speech, and such crimes are now, thanks to us, Mr. Speaker, aggravated criminal offences. In July 2015, and in recognition of our transgender community, we made provision to extend protection from discrimination for individuals who have undergone gender reassignment. Mr. Speaker, the passing of all this legislation has marked a hugely significant change in values and demonstrated our commitment to equal rights for all members of our community, regardless of their sexual orientation or gender reassignment. Mr. Speaker, legislation is hugely important in ensuring that everyone can enjoy the same rights, but legislation alone cannot immediately bring about cultural change. Mr. Speaker, what we do is sometimes controversial. For example, last year we installed stencils to some traffic lights to depict LGBTQ+ images. It was a real conversation starter, Mr. Speaker, and I am glad that it gave people the opportunity to discuss and to see why such visual representation is important to them. I am glad that it provided a platform for discussion and debate, and for this reason, whereas the traffic lights were initially intended to only be installed for the month of Pride, the whole of the Cabinet agreed that they should be kept indefinitely. Mr. Speaker, it really does make me smile every time I cross the Pelican Crossing here at Linewall, and especially this week when I've been coming to Parliament and I see the traffic lights. I've also heard many tourists comment very favourably when they see our traffic lights. Again, another small but important step that I'm glad that we took. And this is why we continue to raise awareness of LGBTQ matters. And for this reason, we are committed to listening to the voices and concerns of the LGBTQ+ community. This was our motivation for launching Gibraltar's first LGBTQ+ survey to coincide with Pride Month last year. Hearing directly from stakeholders is essential in progressive democracies, and I am happy to report that there was an enthusiastic response to the survey, which was open for a period of 3 months. A total of 196 responses were collected, and the information collated will allow my team to glean insights from the experiences of members of the community locally and act on them accordingly. The survey findings in full, plus a report prepared by the Ministry of Equality and its findings, will be published as soon as it's finalised. These valuable insights will enable us to ensure that any remaining barriers experienced by members of the LGBTQ+ community are swiftly eradicated. And while we have ensured that legislation protects members of the LGBTQ+ community, we will continue to mark Pride Month because, Mr. Speaker, there is no place in Gibraltar for homophobia, biphobia, or transphobia. Mr. Speaker, we mark Pride now in a very visual way, as awareness is key. We do this by flying the rainbow flag in prominent places throughout Gibraltar, by illuminating the Moorish castle in rainbow colours, with the installation of the traffic lights, and in supporting the Gay Pride Parade. We organise this visual representation to send a strong message to anyone who needs to hear it, how incredibly supportive this government is and why we do not shy away from doing so. We will continue to mark Pride Month because there is no place in Gibraltar for hate. We will continue to mark Pride Month because it is fair and just. In Gibraltar, we are all of equal value and we all deserve and are entitled to full respect at all times. And we will continue to mark Pride Month, Mr. Speaker, because it is not right that some people, especially young adults, cannot live true and authentic lives out of fear of rejection of those around them. Mr. Speaker, on gender equality, this government's commitment to equality is truly embedded in everything that we do. Gender equality is, of course, another important strand of my equality portfolio, and I believe that gender equality is a necessary component of a modern and progressive society, and it is a vital factor in our pursuit of social justice. A key strand of the gender equality strategy is the economic empowerment of women. Inevitably, the last 2 years have regrettably had an impact on a lot of the projected initiatives for gender equality. But needless to say, Mr. Speaker, we're working extremely hard to catch up. Nevertheless, I'm happy to report that one of the key initiatives of the gender equality strategy, the Women's Mentorship Programme, has been able to continue in recent months. We recently completed the 3rd cycle of this programme, and once again, the feedback from participants, both mentors and mentees alike, was extremely positive. I am very proud of the Women's Mentorship Programme because its aims are hugely ambitious. In the first instance, the programme helps women to develop personal and professional skills, and in the mid to long term, the programme aims to address the underrepresentation of women in positions of leadership and management. We now know that a more gender-balanced workforce is better, not only for organisations and businesses, as proven by numerous studies and research, but for national economies too. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, ensuring that we maximise the skills and talents of both men and women in equal measure is a goal that we can all support and that we can all benefit from. Mr. Speaker, the 3rd cycle of the mentorship programme came to a close in March, and there was a very positive uptake of the programme. There were 57 participants in the 3rd cycle, bringing the total number of participants so far to 175. This means, Mr. Speaker, that since the inception of the Women's Mentorship Programme, 89 mentees have been able to access the support and advice from established professionals. And in case anyone's wondering, Mr. Speaker, if the numbers don't add up, it's because some people have been repeat mentors, and we're very fortunate that some people have been with us through every single cycle, and I'd like to express my gratitude to them. Mr. Speaker, because this is such an invaluable opportunity for women, I'm delighted to announce that the next cycle of the Women's Mentorship Programme will commence in September. I will make a more detailed announcement on this next week, and I would urge and encourage anyone interested in participating in the Women's Mentorship Programme, either as a mentor or a mentee, to contact the Ministry for Equality and to register for the next cycle. Finally, on gender equality, Mr. Speaker, as you know, I was elected Chair of the Commonwealth Women Parliamentarians Steering Committee of the British Island Mediterranean region. Mr. Speaker, and this also gave me a seat at the steering committee of the wider International CWP Committee. Mr. Speaker, of course, as everything happened at once, I was elected as chair in March 2020, just when the pandemic was starting. So in addition to everything that I was doing at the time, I had to deliver on this too. Mr. Speaker, had I known what was going to happen when I stood for election, then maybe I would have considered it before then. But anyway, Mr. Speaker, everything happened and everything was done and everything went well. My tenure came to an end in March this year when we met at CPA at the Isle of Man. Now, Mr. Speaker, one of the objectives of this committee is to encourage more women in Parliament. Another is to support women parliamentarians in discharging their role. Mr. Speaker, I am the only woman in government, and I am one of only 2 women in this Parliament. Mr. Speaker, this ratio is not good because it means that the gender balance of this chamber does not reflect the gender diversity in our community, and it should. So, Mr. Speaker, I have the pleasure to announce that later this year, I will be hosting the regional conference of the Commonwealth Women Parliamentarians of the British Island Mediterranean region in Gibraltar. One of my motivations for hosting this conference here is that I can arrange for outreach with other colleagues, women parliamentarians from the Commonwealth from our region, to promote discussion of political life locally, and hopefully that this be one of the tools that we use to encourage more women to stand for election at the next opportunity. Mr. Speaker, I hosted a CWP conference here in 2015 and it went extremely well and it is still referred to by those who attended. I also hosted the conference last year, albeit virtually. This next conference will be the first in-person conference for a number of years and everyone is looking forward to it. And now, Mr. Speaker, regrettably this week, I am the only woman here. Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady opposite is unable to be with us because of the sad passing of her mother, Lady Hassan. Understandably, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady is going through a difficult time and feels that she cannot be here. I was very saddened yesterday to learn of some online abuse that she received because of this. Mr. Speaker, we are servants of the people and we are in the public eye. But that, Mr. Speaker, should not make us fair game to personal insults and abuse. And Mr. Speaker, we get them all too often. Mr. Speaker, we are also human and we cannot be strong all the time. I am sure that the Honourable Lady would have wanted to have been here if she could. But regrettably, and for a very sad reason, she feels that she cannot. And I ask that people respect this and allow respectfully allow the Honourable Lady to grieve the passing of her mother. My condolences to the Honourable Lady and her family once again. Mr. Speaker, generally on equality, diversity and inclusion, since we have slowly emerged from lockdown, the Ministry of Equality has been able to resume its ongoing training and awareness programs. And equality continues to be embedded in the awareness that we do, and we facilitated bespoke training at the University of Gibraltar for the current PGC and nursing cohorts. We are also working with the Royal Gibraltar Police to provide unconscious bias training to officers and staff. Mr. Speaker, in recent years, the Royal Gibraltar Police has taken significant strides in its equality, diversity and inclusion journey as an organisation, with the formation of an LGBTQ+ forum, the Muslim Officers Forum and the Women in Policing Network. This training on unconscious bias will be a vital opportunity to further embed equality and diversity and inclusion principles at an individual and a strategic level. Mr. Speaker, another key point to address is that of domestic abuse, and that is one of the things that's at the forefront of my equality agenda. Eradicating domestic abuse is a top priority for us, Mr. Speaker, and so much work has been done. As Minister for Justice and as Minister for Equality, I'm only too aware that effecting legislative changes will strengthen responses from key agencies and is crucial in addressing domestic abuse. For this reason, Mr. Speaker, I published a command paper for a bill specifically dedicated to offences relating to abuse. And this landmark, standalone and consolidated piece of legislation seeks to enshrine in law the protection of victims of domestic abuse. However, Mr. Speaker, since that was published, further representations have been received on the command paper. Changes that have been suggested are significant, and they are being made to the draft to ensure that these concerns raised have been dealt with. And the bill will be redrafted and finalised, and we will ensure that coercive and controlling behaviour is criminalised and introduce domestic abuse protection notices and orders. These notices and orders will afford the courts and the Royal Gibraltar Police with new tools with which to address and target domestic abuse as they prohibit abuse and may prohibit contact or stop the perpetrator within a certain distance of a victim's home. Mr. Speaker, this will send a very powerful message to the perpetrators and the wider community that this government is committed to eliminating this very serious social issue. Mr. Speaker, and I hope that within the next months, and certainly before the end of the year, that all the legislative requirements that need to be in place are in place. Mr. Speaker, we will of course deliver training and support those with training because this is a key strategic priority. We have already in 2020 offered training to all of officers of the Royal Gibraltar Police, Mr. Speaker, 250 of them. And this was commissioned from a specialist charity called Saving Lives. In addition to this, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry for Equality also commissioned a very successful training program on the Freedom Program, which is therapeutic interventions for victims and perpetrators of domestic abuse as well as their children. It is a very successful strategy, I am told. Now, Mr. Speaker, turning to disability. And this brings me to speak about another landmark equality achievements in the progress that we have made. Mr. Speaker, in my last budget speech, I mentioned how COVID had put a stop to a lot of our plans. This year has seen a resurgence in our efforts to make sure that we are back on track. Basically, Mr. Speaker, we have to do double the work in half the time, but we are committed to doing so. Setting our work in context, it was after much preparation in 2017 that we passed the Disability Act, the fundamental purpose of which is, of course, to promote and protect and ensure the full and equal enjoyment of fundamental rights and freedoms of people with disabilities. Even the Chamber of Commerce at the time described it as one of the most significant pieces of legislation that our government had introduced. Of course, this progress had been previously overlooked by those opposite, who, although now attempting to rewrite history in this respect, the reality is that they did little to nothing in the furtherance of rights of people with disabilities. Mr. Speaker, the passing of that legislation was always intended to be the first step to Gibraltar requesting that the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities be extended to Gibraltar. Quite unlike the transposition of an EU directive, of course in the good old days, Mr. Speaker, but no longer, having conventions extended to us is something that we do via the United Kingdom, and it can be a long and complicated process with various stages and audits along the way. But as you heard the Chief Minister say on Tuesday, this process has already begun. I have already met with the government's legal team, and their work has started, and they will be working closely with my team at the Ministry for Equality to progress it. They all received the memo from me, Mr. Speaker, that this must be a priority, and I want this to be progressed as quickly as possible. In order to be able to progress on the extension of the Convention, we need to step up the standard once again. A tremendous amount of work is required on this journey, but what matters is that the work has already commenced and my equality and justice teams will be working together to deliver. Returning to the Disability Act, Mr. Speaker, when it was passed in 2017, there were two sections that were not in force. These are the sections that require that all buildings be made accessible. Immediately after the passing of the Act, we passed the Part R building regulations. This means that since then, all new builds or modifications are required to meet the accessible standards. Sections 13 and 14, however, relate to existing buildings, and these provisions were paused in order for those responsible for the buildings have sufficient time to prepare and phase in. We did this in full consultation and agreement with the Disability Society at the time. It was for this reason that in 2019, the Chief Minister announced tax relief for businesses who adapted and made modifications to their existing premises. Regrettably, Mr. Speaker, another initiative that became a victim of COVID and slowed down the progress that we wished to make, and as such, inevitably delayed the coming into force of these sections. For this reason, Mr. Speaker, the Chief Minister announced that he would make, once again, this tax relief possible and make it available for a further 2 years. I can announce, Mr. Speaker, that it is our intention to trigger those provisions after the end of that period and bring them into force. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, bring them into force in the lifetime of this Parliament. Therefore, the Ministry for Equality will shortly be launching an information campaign on what these obligations will entail and will offer guidance in their usual helpful way. We will also offer training so that everyone is aware of their responsibilities and what is expected of them as best practice, as we want to support everyone in getting it right. Of course, the work on the Convention also goes hand in hand with the government's disability strategy, and this essentially provides our roadmap for the journey. The Ministry for Equality is responsible for this strategy and its delivery and spearheads it and has been doing so for the last 10 years. All the improvements that we have seen throughout our term in office is due to this. But we are stepping this up too. And I would like to publish a multi-agency national strategy, very much like the Gibraltar National Mental Health Strategy that I commissioned last year. And I would like for this to be published by the end of this year. That means that there will be a lot of strategic activity in this regard in the coming months, and there will, of course, be stakeholder consultation. I have already also commissioned refresher training on the Disability Act for the public sector, as there will have been changes at senior management level since the last one. This will be rolled out in September and will be a reminder to all departments of their responsibilities on having disability policies to promote inclusion and comply with their obligations under the Act. The Ministry for Equality will assist in revising their policies if necessary. As this work will be undertaken by my team, Mr. Speaker, there will be consistency of standard across the board. There will also be other training programs offered, and these will be sector focused so that we can properly target for maximum effectiveness. One of the most important strands of our government's disability strategy, Mr. Speaker, and the first thing that the Ministry for Equality did when the restraints of COVID were lifted, was to restart the disability customer care training on language and etiquette that we had halted a year or so earlier. This training now forms part of the government's Human Resources Department training prospectus, and to date, 270 public servants have received this training. And Mr. Speaker, the next session in July will see another class, so surely this figure will go up even more. Mr. Speaker, further efforts have been made to ensure that this training is available to other sectors as well. Mr. Speaker, including the private sector. And the Department of Equality are currently liaising with the Gibraltar Sports and Leisure Authority and their care agency to make arrangements to facilitate training to them as well. Mr. Speaker, interaction between the general public and representative bodies and government bodies is another important strand of our disability strategy. As with training and awareness, this is a strand that needs to be nurtured and developed continuously if we are to develop the services that Gibraltar deserves. Mr. Speaker, I am happy to say that it is something that the Ministry of Equality does very well, and this can be shown by the work that they did this last year. The Ministry of Equality were there to advise on the introduction of a WhatsApp service available to people with hearing difficulties that needed to contact the GHA's 111 service for either the COVID helpline or the mental health crisis pathway. Mr. Speaker, also in conjunction with the GHA and Public Health, the Ministry of Equality joined GITA in the campaign on hearing loss prevention during Deaf Awareness Week. Mr. Speaker, the government has also seen the implementation this year of sign video services, originally introduced in the GHA in 2014 and now available across most, if not all, public departments. This now makes British Sign Language interpretation available instantly to any department or agency that may require the service in order to communicate with members of the public. And while we're on the subject, Mr. Speaker, let us not forget how this House was recently passed the British Sign Language Act recognising British Sign Language as the language in Gibraltar. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Equality has for years been in close contact with the Ministry of the Environment and the GSLA in their development of accessible services at our beaches and pools. This year is no different. And you will no doubt be aware, Mr. Speaker, that when the government inherited the Europa Pool complex, the facilities were not ideally suited for people with disabilities. There have been numerous improvements, Mr. Speaker. We made an announcement in this respect recently. And I would like to thank both the GSLA and the Ministry of the Environment for their dedication and awareness this past year and in previous years. As Mr. Speaker, I think I can confidently say that Gibraltar probably has some of the most accessible beaches in Europe. And while, of course, I'm not going to pretend that our services are perfect, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry for Equality and other government departments that allow for improvement of the services every year will continue to work together, of course, in furtherance of the government's disability strategy. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that if improvements are required going forward, that they will be identified and provided to. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry for Equality is the central coordinating government department on disability, and the Ministry for Equality is very much involved in an advisory role with the numerous committees like the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment Panel mainly led by the Department of Education and the Traffic Commission, and is also a consultee to town planning and building control on new applications. It is right for this to be the case. Mr. Speaker, on another note, I am really excited about our partnership with Special Olympics. One of our joint initiatives is the Special Olympics Healthy Athletes Programme, and this government hopes to emulate this in Gibraltar. The House may remember a meeting that was held last March between the government, including the Chief Minister, Special Olympics Gibraltar, and Mr. David Evangelista, the President and Managing Director of Special Olympics Europe Eurasia, and Senior Advisor for International Development of Special Olympics. The Healthy Athletes Programme, Mr. Speaker, is a programme developed by Special Olympics, who are very much as specialists in the field of learning disabilities, and designed to facilitate various health checkups to athletes with learning disabilities, and importantly, provide them with the necessary training to the medical practitioners who see them. This programme, Mr. Speaker, is already used extensively around the world by Special Olympics at both national and world games, and has proved incredibly successful in highlighting health issues that athletes may have. Anecdotally, Mr. Speaker, because of the issues that people with learning disabilities may have and their limitations on communication, it can have an impact on their health, and the screening programme is obviously a very preventative measure and has proved to be very effective. And whereas this programme was originally aimed at athletes attending the Games, the desire from Special Olympics globally is for this initiative to be used in communities and to be used across the board for anyone who may need it. This is why, Mr. Speaker, having only just returned from Berlin for this purpose, to learn about this programme, Mr. Speaker, I cannot wait to put it into action. Mr. Speaker, at this juncture, I would really love to recognise and thank Mrs. Annie Riso, MBE, for her sterling and selfless work on the progress of Special Olympics in Gibraltar. Her dedication to Special Olympics athletes and the movement is incredible, and every time I travel with her, Mr. Speaker, she is so established in the world of Special Olympics that everybody knows who Annie is. So she truly needs to be recognised for the progress she's made in this regard. And thanks to her, Mr. Speaker, for opening the doors to us to access this programme and the training thereon. It will have a very positive effect on us locally, and this will form part of the health equality strand of the government's disability strategy. And so finally, Mr. Speaker, earlier I spoke about our LGBTQ survey and consulting the stakeholders and the results and the report that I'm about to publish, but this is not the only survey that's been undertaken by the Ministry for Equality. You may remember, Mr. Speaker, that a disability survey was also launched in October 2021, and it ran until the 31st of January this year. This information has been collated and a report is currently being compiled for me by the Ministry for Equality, and this will also be published once complete. I am sure that its contents will make for interesting reading and will be of exceptional value to our government's disability strategy. Mr. Speaker, I have to really commend the small but extremely effective and efficient team at the Ministry for Equality, Mr. Speaker. They really are committed, full of ideas, and wanting to make progress at every single opportunity. And I thank them for all the work that I do. Mr. Speaker, in wrapping up, I'd like to thank absolutely everyone who I have worked with during this year, who has supported and advised me, in particular those who work closely with me in my office, Craig, Leighton, Irene and Ian. And of course, Mr. Speaker, to yourself and your staff in Parliament for supporting us too. And it goes without saying, Mr. Speaker, to our ministerial colleagues. Mr. Speaker, we work very closely together as government ministers. We are always there to support each other, Mr. Speaker, and of course, we can count on each other's support in government for a long time to come. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your indulgence. Thank you.